Thank you, Carl.
Yes, ma'am.
And thank you for going to New York.
You're very welcome. It's my pleasure. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to start essentially with where we left off last time. We're going to quickly take a look at the options, where we are on the timeline that the superintendent mentioned. We'll then review some of the relevant data that we identified during the last meeting, following which we'll do a sort of pros and cons analysis of the various options, ending with the recommendation that the administration is going to advance. And further to that recommendation, we'll also review a sample timeline as to what implementation of that resolution might look like. So with that, Beth, if you go to the first slide. Again, you'll recognize these. These were the options that we talked about before, the appointment of the independent receiver. Everyone knows, of course, that we have 60 days to make a final decision, but that's only if we're on the commissioner's list. If we want to nominate our own independent receiver, who's not on the commissioner's list, we only have 40 days to do that. The second option is to, of course, close the school, and that would involve a distribution of the students, as well as the disposition of the building. And the third option, of course, is to close and open a new school. And you'll see under the time restraints that exist for a school district in order to qualify for a new bed school, we would have to file by March the 1st. Now, there is an extraordinary circumstances exception, which would probably get us out to about June 1st. But from a practical perspective, as we considered that, it would be highly impractical for us to take advantage or try to take advantage of that rule, because just imagine what it would take to open a new school and you get started the first day on June 1st. I mean, you'd be harder to be able to get student enrollment in a line, much less hiring all the folks that you have to hire, installing the program, curriculum, and all the rest. So really, from a practical standpoint, we're looking at March 1st if we're considering that third option. Thank you. Let's go back one, please. Oh, the second slide, sorry. We have a slide that was missing. On the timeline, folks, we are essentially at the point where we're at that 40 and 60 day mark. We're making our presentation, of course, tonight was the timeline contemplated. Of course, the date for that 40-day recommendation would be the 25th of December outside. And if we are going to submit a final decision, in other words, if we don't elect to nominate our own independent receiver, our final decision will be due on the 14th of January. So that's so much for the timeline. Next slide. Okay. Now, looking at the data that we identified last time, remember the board indicated some interest in taking a look at what the enrollment looks like. Well, this is it for School 41. We have grades pre-K through 6, of course, and a total of 495 students. And as you can see from the chart, 78% of them are in the general education program, and the remainder are special education students. And if we look at it in terms of English dominant versus English language learners, you'll see the percentages there, 93 and 7. Next slide. So the question then arrives, especially if we're looking at closing a school and repurposing it perhaps, we have to figure out where are we going to put all these folks. So this is my grade breakdown of the number of students. So in general, I think we have about 373 students. And as you will see, in terms of our special ed population, we have some 54 students there. And in terms of available seats, if we were going to try and deposit that entire school in a building, there are not seats available sufficient to do that. Okay, so we were also wondering, where do these some 1,200 students who live in the School 41 geocode come from? Well, we have 99 students in the geocode that actually go to the school. The rest go elsewhere. School 42, charter schools, parent placement, other district schools. Again, this will certainly play in terms of the distribution of students and how we're ultimately going to wrestle with that problem. Slide. Okay, so again, further up to the enrollment, just in terms of where folks live, we have about 11% of students currently live within 0.5 miles of the school. Another 20% are in the 41 geocode. We have 69% that are currently located in the Northwest Zone for a total of 495 students. And the graphics sort of break it down. Sort of an interesting piece is other schools within the Northwest Zone with the largest numbers of students who are attending 41. So we draw from school 34, 43, and school 7. Okay, just another way of illustrating what I just said. For those who like to see points on a map, this is how it breaks down in terms of the various zones in our enrollment placed on that. In terms of our staff, we have 5 administrators in the building, some 60 teachers, 23 of which are tenured. We have 26 teaching assistants and paraprofessionals, and 13 non-instructional folks. So this decision, folks, whatever we do, is going to affect about 104 folks. And again, more concerning our staff, particularly our teaching staff. We have 23 teachers with greater than 3 years seniority, and the balance have less than 3 years seniority. And that, of course, includes not only classroom teachers, but all of our teachers as specialists. In terms of the budget impact, just so we would have a place to start, it currently costs a little over $8 million per year to operate the school in its present configuration. The breakdown is by fairly gross categories. If you are used to reviewing our budgets in line by line, but just from the standpoint of overall numbers, you're talking about an $8 million investment that we have in school. With respect to supplemental funds, one of these funds don't come our RA funds. We have funds that supplement that $8 million that are spelled out here. We, of course, have the SIG grant for about $500,000. We have the community schools grant for $904,000. And we have Title I, which would estimate about $435,000. So all in all, counting the $2.5 million over the 5 years, we're talking about roughly $4 million. In terms of breaking down the financial considerations a little further, especially with respect to teacher staffing, you'll see the average teacher cost when we factor in all benefits as well as base pay is a little north of $96,000. We have some hourly rates for extra activities, 41 and 35, respectively, with respect to the time with students and time spent in planning. If we were, for example, going to just guesstimate PD costs for teachers, if we took 20 days, let's say, of additional PD, plus 6 hours a day times 62 teachers, we're at about 7,400 hours and 216,000 hours worth of benefits up to a little more than 304. Some other factors that are probably relevant, and we've classified them by our options. In terms of support, if we were going to close and reopen, this is not going to be something that we can accomplish without some significant support. Now, there are 2 ways, I suppose, to go about it. One way is to use a partner organization. There are organizations out there, not a lot of them, but there are, that actually specialize in helping districts turn around schools. Or another alternative would be for us to hire a restart administrator. It would be our employee and would be able to work pretty much in our direction as opposed to a contract, which tends to be a little bit more independent. In terms of closure and disbursement and independent receiver, that's a little tough to speculate in terms of what kind of support. In terms of closure and disbursement, our support would all be internal, right? Folks that would have to button up the building and so forth, or otherwise dispose of it. An independent receiver is just another. The independent receiver has so much autonomy in terms of how to structure the program that we just really can't guess what a receiver might require in terms of support. On the transportation side, we have about 80% of the students at the school now receiving transportation. Certainly, if we close and disperse, those students will all have to be transported. And of course, what would happen with an independent receiver again, not really, it's hard to guess what an independent receiver would require. But if I were to speculate, I would think that it'd be pretty close to the 80% again across the board. In terms of facilities usage, if we were going to close and reopen, we would of course have to refresh the space, I'm sure, paint, lighting, furnishings, and so forth, especially if we have a different program. We would certainly have a focus on community schools because the superintendent and the board committed some time toward that model, so I couldn't see us not doing that if we closed. If we closed and dispersed, of course, we would have to figure out what are we going to do with the building. That would be the factor there. And again, with the independent receiver, don't know. The independent receiver could perhaps say that the place has to be redesigned somehow. In terms of our special education population, we presently have 7 classrooms now in the building. Whether those 7 classrooms would absolutely remain even on a closure and reopen model sort of remains to be seen, because, for example, if some sort of specialized program is put in the school, all of the students may not have any interest in it. So that's just something that would remain to be seen. But right now, we have the 7, and we certainly are going to have to account for them. And certainly, in the case of closure, we absolutely are going to have to account for what are we going to do with special education students. And again, with the independent receiver,
This is nice.
What the independent receiver would like to do in terms of special education.
It looks nice.
Of course, the school has a pre-K. We gave this some thought, and we'd rather not continue a program which has been started and is continuing and is successful. We don't contemplate that if we did a closure,
This is nice.
We would need, of course, 2 more pre-K classrooms if we close the building altogether. And again, from the independent receiver, okay, so some of the pros and cons on the potential pathways. If we're going to close and disperse, the pros, we perhaps would be able to repurpose the use of the building and maybe find some use that the community might find constructive. I mean, that certainly could be a pro. So certainly a pro would be to end the priority receivership status. It would be one less school that we would have in the receivership status. Cons, though, pretty much outweigh the pros. We would separate students. We'd separate staff. We would decrease the district-wide seat capacity because we have to absorb all these students. We could possibly lose as much as $1.5 million in grant funds. We would possibly increase our transportation costs. And of course, we'd have to, again, deal with the very difficult topic of what are we going to do with these 7 autism strands that we have in the school. On the independent receiver, the pros and cons balance out a little bit more. On the pro side, would be a reduction in the impact on instructional and operational capacity of the independent receiver. We have to supply some, not all. Our organization will still be responsible for a lot of what the independent receiver is able to do, because we would be the ones who would implement a lot of the recommendations. You see the independent receiver coming in with the entire central office staff. Certainly, there would be the possibility for some innovative model that the independent receiver would come up with that might be very attractive. That's certainly a potential positive. We could have a potential improvement in academic results. Well, frankly, the research with respect to independent receiver success thus far is kind of mixed. And I'd say the verdict is still out. I think there's no automatic as far as that's concerned. And, of course, it could provide a new option for some of our families. The independent receiver might come to us with a program that might be very attractive to some of our families. So that's a potential. On the con side, our financial obligation would certainly increase. We'd have costs for the receiver, maybe, and although there's a period under which the commissioner might have to bear the cost of the receiver, but that hasn't been the state's position thus far. The program costs, certainly, we would bear that. We bear the professional learning costs because we have a new program, we have to grant everybody else. So
Can you make a
certainly there would be additional staff. Even as we've seen in the Geneseo, and we do the coach model, which they were great. But increases the staff size on the third. The potential for restrictions in enrollment, student programmatic assignments and placement, I mean, that all comes along with the receiver. The receiver has the ability to impact all those things. Constricted seat availability within the district, loss of control of the facility, reduced access to site-based programs, potential changes in the student composition, impact on our process for staffing, decrease of district-wide seat capacity, and of course, the impact of all of that on our families. And finally, we have the closed enrollment model. And here I think the pros outweigh the cons. And the pros at least dictate to your administration that this is the course that we should most seriously consider. So, the pros: innovation. We would certainly engage a partner or a restart administrator to develop and help us implement a new program. And when I say new, I mean that's new in the largest sense. The commissioner is very rigid as far as that goes. The program has got to be new. We would certainly have some continuity with our strategic framework and with the path forward work that we've been doing. Hopefully we'll be able to blend this new school right into it. Of course, we would continue our financial alignment, as opposed to having some extraordinary expenses imposed on us over which we have no control. Certainly be consistent with our present operational scheme. Students and families would have the option to choose to remain. There would be increased opportunities for professional learning for our staff. We would, of course, big plus, just like if we close the school otherwise, we will end the receivership status with the school, big plus. And of course, we would have the opportunity for a possible continuation of our seat grants. On the con side, this is going to cost money, folks. If we close and reopen, we will have the costs of the partner or restart administrator. There will be program costs because it's going to be something entirely new. There will be professional learning costs, of course, because when you install new programs, certainly folks have to be trained in how to implement. And of course, we may have additional staffing that would be required, again, depending upon the program that's installed. So if we were going to pursue this last course, we put together a sample timeline as to just what this lift would look like over time. Okay, so we would probably start with a preliminary proposal, which wouldn't really be very detailed, except that we would be talking about the closing of the school. That proposal would be developed for formal adoption by the board. That would have to happen by the 21st. The 25th, of course, is our deadline, as you'll recall, if we were going to select someone that's not on the commissioner's list. So we thought the 21st was a good time for us to make the decision because I don't think any of us are going to work on Christmas. And secondly, we would submit that decision to SED by January 12th. There will probably have to be some things developed between the 21st and the 12th to make sure that we have a coaching decision for the commission to consider. We would then actually get after the refining plan reviewing that plan with the school community, and obviously submitting it to the board for its ultimate approval. That would all be done by February the 15th. And as you can obviously tell, and certainly the folks I've been working with all week on this know, this is fast. The final school closure plan and petition to register the new school, of course, has to be submitted by that March 1 deadline that I referred to. We then have our own internal deadline, not driven by any particular requirements, but it would be good to have student applications on board by the 9th of March. We need to obviously present selecting the principal. Now, in a perfect world, we would select that principal probably before the plans even develop. But given the paucity of candidates out there, we use this outside date. That doesn't mean that that's the date we would aim for. We would try to get a new principal on board just as soon as we can. It seems to me an imperative that a person who's going to implement the program is a lot better off trying to do so if they have a role in planning it. So much for the principal. We then obviously would have to design and develop an instructional program that had happened during March and April. Then obviously we have to recruit for student enrollment and give folks the broadest opportunity possible to enroll in this new program. And then, of course, we have to get underway with the process of closing the school, selection of the staff for the new school. That would happen between April and June. We try and finalize student enrollment by the 31st of May. And then we would begin a series of meetings to ensure that there was a smooth transition for the students, the staff, the parents, all the folks who have to impact the opening of the school. We would hope that would happen in June. We have final preparations, of course, ongoing during the summer of 2018. We then go into a formal orientation for incoming students and families during the summer toward the end. And of course, our objective would be to have a new school on board and running the first day of school in September. So with that, if I can enter or entertain any questions. Yes, ma'am.
What are the rules around staff, principal, etc., in the closed reopen option? Can you guys hear me? What are the rules in staffing? Rules. I mean, I'm sure that the state.
Well, the state has made it pretty clear to us that if we are going to choose the closure in the open model, that there would have to be a significant change in staff. The one that we're looking at the most would be the one that would be in play if we had an independent receiver, which would mean a new principal, and about 50% of the staff would be able to remain. They would have to interview in, and the remainder of the staff would probably be dispersed to other schools, all of course consistent with the transfer rules that are contained in the RTO project.
You said the one we're looking at, does that mean that there are several options?
No, this is the option that we are looking at, the closure and reopening. Yes, ma'am.
Can you describe the framework and mechanisms for input from the school community on this plan?
I really think that's yet to be developed. Commissioner Adams, if anyone else wants to.
No, just to clarify, I'm talking about between the last time the board met and today. What was the framework for getting the school community's input on this presentation, and what were the mechanisms for getting that input, and who were the sources? Not necessarily individual names, but did you meet the school-based planning team repeatedly, or what was the framework?
I'll have to defer to others because I was not involved in that aspect. The superintendent. During the path board work, I know we were over in the zone.
Specifically about the school, from the last meeting in terms of communication about some next steps to try to make people feel like they are aware of the process, aware of what we're doing over the next several weeks to this date. I did meet with the PTO. I went to that meeting. I did engage in a phone call with the CET. But however, some of our operations over the last several weeks have been to be more fact-finding about what are we required to do moving forward, like what are the elements if you make an important decision about the first pathways to take. And the other piece is I did go over and speak with the team today, so I will make it at the end of practice to make sure I'm going in and updating them. Because they're here this evening, I wanted to give them some context of what we talked about tonight from we present, and then that the board will be engaging in a discussion. So that's the engagement on the school side other than my regular work schedule.
So there's been no substantive, meaningful input in terms of the plans that are proposed here. I mean, communication is one thing, like keeping people up to date on timelines is one thing, and then seeking information about the criteria from the state and, you know, the fact finding regarding those options, and then also data extraction, which is appreciated since the last meeting you responded to the things that we requested. In terms of like a major key piece for me is the people who are in the building, the people who are members of this school community having meaningful input, not being told the timeline or being told later, being managed later regarding whichever option is being put forward. It really truly is valuable. It's not like just an exercise to go through to say that, you know, to check off a box of input or to have a signature somewhere that there was community input. It actually really truly does inform good decision making. And I mean, and that's why you all are spending so much time with the path forward process. And, you know, I've heard the superintendent speak to the importance of this before. So, you know, we did have a short time frame, but the other fact-finding information had to be done. We are under a compressed schedule, but that, you know, I'm just shocked that there was no framework or no mechanism for getting input from the school community.
And I think we want to address that first, because quite frankly, what we're trying to do is get a sense of what's going to be required when weekend events come. And it's been clear that I'll say age, I have to recommend to you a model based on a successful similar school with a curriculum, a school day, and a training. So one of the things that I would want, if I were giving input, is I'd want some clarity, and I've sought that clarity. So knowing, for example, that the International Baccalaureate curriculum, as an example, would probably be acceptable. What I want to do is be very clear about what might be acceptable, because it's clear that we are submitting something that has a demonstrated capacity to work at Bow. I know that you've been involved in some of this as well. And so what I'm trying to do is get clarity around what are the other options. I know that International Baccalaureate is one. I wanted to know what the other options are, like expeditionary learning. And then our question is really around what curriculum would be appropriate. We know that people, I think, we've heard, some STEAM or arts focus, certainly a community school, neighborhood enrollment patterns. Those are things that have come through. But it looks like from the paperwork that we've seen, it's more specific around the actual curriculum, the grade level standards, the training protocols, the interview process, who's going to do the interviews. And that's really what we're trying to get at.
Well, I'm not going to beat a dead horse, but all of that is absolutely critically important. But it is complementary to, not in place of, the stuff I just talked about. So I agree.
But Commissioner Adams, if I can pitch like, I mean, there's a lot of time between now and February 15th. That's when really, I would suggest, the most community input is needed, as we are developing the plan for the school.
But we have three decision
The
points.
decision points are all driven by factors over which we have very little control. I mean, we're very early in the process. We're just deciding. I can't imagine that we even take a poll of the audience. How many people would want to close the school and just disperse the kids? So we're down to two options only. How many folks have an independent receiver that they know of that they can suggest? We're just not suggest, at least from my experience, that a great deal of community input would really be helpful, not at this juncture. But if we select one of these options, then community input, I would suggest.
First set of people we got to talk to are people in the community to decide what model and so forth. But I don't know that there was much of a choice to dialogue with the community about. And if I was wrong for being so presumptuous about that, I guess I'm wrong. But that's I think is the thinking there.
Well, I'll tell you that the framework that was just described, and again, I don't think we have written guidelines to this day, but the framework that was described was very similar to the old restart, I believe, the restart under the old rubric. What you described about firing the principal, 50% of the staff, and so forth, that's similar to an old framework. And that is what is implied, apparently,
And that
under
is
the
the
closure
indication.
and reopen.
Excuse me,
So,
sorry.
so you know, that's a relevant question to talk to the school community about.
Well, it's more relevant to talk to the state education department and
Both.
get some idea as to what it would accept and that they would accept.
Mary, I'm
And
sorry.
and it would be great to have that in writing. Like, I agree that that is critical. I'm not trying to diminish, like, all of this work. It is critical and has to be done. I'm just saying that there's another.
A lot of, as the board president said at the last meeting, a lot of this is relational. And getting these folks to commit this sort of information to writing when this is the first time this has ever been done outside of New York City. And they did commit it to writing for the folks in New York City. I mean, we spent half a day with them going through the process that they utilize.
I realize.
We have an idea of what will work. It may not be the only thing that will work, but we do know what will work.
It looks like Willa and Commissioner Hallmark want to say something. But Mary, I just want to make sure I had clarity about your last point. Could you just repeat that?
In this presentation, verbally, I don't think it's written down, but the description was the expectation, the estimation, the hope, or the prediction is that the commissioner is going to treat our close, reopen approach similar to the old, I believe it was called restart. It was within the turnaround framework, right? Whatever the old framework was a few years ago, under the old guidelines. It's very similar to that, which is inherently disruptive to the school. I mean, all of our options are inherently disruptive to the school, but it's a question of relative disruption. And it's also, I would argue, relational, and relational approaches have a relevant place with regard to how we interact with the school community, as well as with the state education department and politicians. And I would argue that with these, there were strengths and assets from within the school community that were brought to bear on the politicians and the state education department that helped contribute to the success. And we did not have like a wall at this stage, like this last month's stage. I don't think. I mean, it was fast moving and difficult, and there were, carrying multiple,
I will say that one of the things, if I can interrupt, and I'm sorry, President Hoyt, but one of the reasons that we have on there a restarted administrative partner is it became very clear to us that with the current staff that we're not going to have the capacity to do what is going to be required. That with the current chiefs working with current schools, the current receiverships, and the amount of work, it was very clear that we should have an additional chief for this school and probably another person working in the curriculum in preparation for submission of the bed scope. So that was a big learning because we're running a system right now. We're working, as you know, on a number of critical areas that require us to do some requesting for some additional staffing as we seek to both run and manage the day-to-day district as well as, bring additional corrective actions to light in a number of areas. So that was one of the things we wanted to actually get to New York to ascertain that we probably do need to staff up, create a job description, and if we're going to go into close and reopen, that we see at least 1 and up to 2 additional administrators immediately that can do that work because it became clear to us in New York that this is a highly specialized office. And we actually have some contacts as well with some former Rochester folks that actually are in New York City doing this work. So we were able to get them to spend the half day with us. And I will say that the chancellor then reached out personally to offer us the opportunity for our team to spend some time in New York, specifically working side by side with their curriculum teams, et cetera. So I thought that was a nice gesture.
Commissioner Powell?
I will tell you, Sharon Venture, who represents Commissioner reiterated that point to me this weekend, that they're standing by, ready to have a meeting. I don't think that addresses Ms. question, but I just want to say.
Commissioner Hallmark?
Yeah, I wanted to speak to you, Mary, that I don't perceive that there's been a lull between the board and the executive team in this process.
The school community and the process.
But my sense is, and I remember asking a question in the last meeting we had here, which was, well, what do we do? Do we just come up with, programs and curriculum and like throw a paper airplane at the commissioner and the state and say, is this going to work? And they said no. We have to get it right before we give a proposal to them. So there's a lot of research that needs to be done here before we can come to the community and say, how about this, this, or this? Because we know already that this, or this will be approved by the commissioner. But we can't just come up with our own ideas, throw an airplane at the commissioner, and then risk being slammed down. We want this school to succeed. So we need to find out what the parameters are first, and that's why the research is so important. That's my sense of it. That's what the question was that I asked in the last meeting.
Hold on. Vice President Elliott had been raising her hand.
Yeah, let me just say, I clearly understand where Mary is coming from. It's just a matter of talking to them.
Right.
Just to show where we're going. We're not making decisions. That's how you develop relationships. Just let them know where you are. That's not even necessary. Just say, here's where we are, and be a part of the community. I think that'll go a long way. You don't have the answers yet. Just tell them we don't have the answers yet. Just keep them informed, keep the community informed of what's going on. They're not coming here. Not one time have they come here in opposition. They came here for information, and we need to make sure that we are communicating just where we are. I don't know where we are. I don't know what's going on. Just communicate that. I think that's what we're going along with. We haven't done that good yet, and we could just say we will have this information when we hear from the state. We just haven't done a good job of doing that to make them comfortable of where we're going.
Commissioner Adams, before I get back to you, let me just go one step further. I think you can do both. These aren't mutually exclusive approaches. We wouldn't even have to just say, this is where we're at. You could go to them, just like we've gone to, and I see Barb, and I hear Barb nodding her head. There's no reason, just as well as we travel to New York City to listen to people about advice, we can go to the community and say, what do you think we should do? So these aren't mutually exclusive approaches. But that doesn't mean I miss Commissioner Hallmark's point, which is a point that I tried to make a few weeks ago, Carl. We have to develop relationships. In the end, this is different than anything we've ever done. Even though we did some miraculous things in terms of East High School, this is totally different because the Commissioner literally has a sight on us. And she has established the rules, she didn't, the state has. And there's certain rules we have to play by. However, we can put the players on the field. And Barbara is nodding her head that the players on the field can be the people in the community and the people in New York City. But we got to make sure the plan that we come up with is something that's acceptable to the commissioner. Because I was at a meeting with her yesterday, and she's pretty clear. She wants a community school, right? And the community, and that's right, Mary, that's right. We can get those kinds of ideas from the community.
But let's say, because I've certainly spent a good deal of time with community members in conversations most of last weekend, about 5 or 6 hours with people that have direct connections to the school. I know Beth went over today. What we have not done, though, is a broad-based community meeting where we can give an overview, like Carl did tonight, to the larger community, showing them the issues and the options. One of the things we're trying to do is make sure that in the conversations we're having, and some of them, yes, are small group conversations consistently, because we're trying to explore things without committing to something that somebody would say, well, you said this, because quite frankly, I learned a lot by going to New York, and then subsequent conversations with both the commissioner and with Chancellor Farina, and tomorrow we'll have a chance to see that Rosa. So every day as we learn something else, it's really an understanding of what is the high-quality components of securing a new beds code in a fashion that will look like it fits not only the current school community, but we've also been in contact with people that are opening housing units in 2018 and 2019. We know of 200 new units going within walking distance. So there has been a conversation with a broader sort of neighborhood community approach. But I think what we need to do now, and I asked today for Beth to go over and to go over several times, so we just to do that back and forth communication. But I don't think it would hurt us to, certainly now that we've done that presentation here, to do that presentation for the broader.
Commissioner Anderson, are you going to say something else?
So are we, my understanding is that there's three options that we heard last time, we're hearing them again tonight, with a recommendation of moving forward with the beds code, and that's what I hear you talking about most, consistently, is that we are seeking the criteria for establishing a new beds code. My whole point is that getting to that point, that decision point, should have had discussion, should have had input, because there are things we lose efficiencies. I mean, even if you want to look at it from a cold calculating efficiency, scientific or economic frame, having these, and you use this language too. I mean, some of your frameworks, it's good. Having the users, if you want to call it, end users in mind, whatever the terminology is, it's efficient to have people really there and not feel threatened by that, not feel that someone's going to misinterpret what you say and say that you said this. I mean, this is our school community. We own our schools. We are, parents and families in the schools, employees, we are the school community. These are our schools. And so to partition the process in this way prior to a key recommendation is just, it's not the best way.
And also,
Vice President Miller?
I also think that we have to take into consideration the emotional trauma that our school, and people in our the teachers are facing. We're talking about, the leadership over there who are doing a great job over there. They just didn't have the time. What about the emotional trauma that they're going through? Sometimes just going into the school and saying, how you doing? That's an informal conversation, but it goes a long way. And I'm all right with the research stuff, but I also think that we just have to do that. We just have to touch people. It's also emotional for people. And I don't believe we've done a good job with going in there, just saying, hey, how are you doing? So we just need to do more of that. We need to cradle the people who are over there now, because they're in a vulnerable position over at School 41. And we need to do more of that over there. It's vulnerable over there. They don't know where they're going. We don't know what we're doing at this point. And so it's important that, we try to support this community as best as we can. And I think we need to improve on it.
I wouldn't disagree with that at all. And I think that that reaching out that we need to do, the we includes the board, the commissioners, not just the superintendent's team. I think we, as the board members, need to be reaching out as well. The liaison, I don't know. That's our job too.
Okay. So, next steps. Carl, what would be the next steps? Obviously, we know. I think we have some consensus. The next step would be to take this phase of the conversation to the community, not just the folks who are here, but for the people in that part of the community, convene a meeting. Is that the plan?
Well, we'd like to create the job descriptions for the 2 staff requests and begin the process of securing either a partner or to create a turnaround position that we can use to help assist doing the work moving forward.
So I just want to be clear about this. So the purpose of that position will be, number one purpose would be to begin to collect community conversations. Because this is to Mary's point, I would not want us
No, we'll do that part. There's a lot of paperwork, research, and due diligence that has to be done. So in New York City, as an example, in another district, they either have a partner, like when the University of Rochester became a partner for East, they had a staff in addition to the staff to do the work, because it's the same level of work that we have to submit the same kind of plan that an UPO would submit within the next 60 to 90 days. So in order for people to be able to continue the work that they're doing, we know that we're going to need additional support, which is why we looked at two models. One would be to hire a partner. The partner would then come in and assist in doing the work, or to create a position and to staff up from there. And that's really where we were, trying to figure out which of those options was better. We did meet with a partner in addition to individual New York City. We met with a partner that assists individual New York City schools to prepare for this.
Okay, so I just want clarity on this, because I think this is actually a good segue from Mary's conversation to the next phase. For me, I'm just speaking for myself, if we're talking about hiring a partner who perhaps already has a framework for how they want to do this, I wouldn't personally, I'm just speaking for me, I would not support that, because I think if you're talking about somebody who's being hired to help facilitate a conversation, develop something, one of the conversations being with the people in the community, I'm down for that. Because I do think there has to be some level of maybe extra staff being brought in, resources being brought in, but they should not have, they may have some ideas about what may work, but they should not have, in advance of talking to the community, a preconceived notion about what needs to be done. And I think this is in part Mary's point. Okay, you're at a certain point, we've laid out our options. It was clear there's just really one option, maybe two. Now that you've decided that maybe the board has decided on closure and then reopen, have someone who can facilitate, if that's what your desire is, have someone who can facilitate that conversation among other partners with the community. Is that what we're talking about?
So we can show you the partnership model, but the partnership model is very much people that go in, talk to the community. No, I think we can do that. There's a lot going on right now. But they also have experience, right, helping to select the curriculum, the grade level curriculum, the staff training, and the setting up what has to be interview processes and protocols have to all be submitted. So it's really having had the experience of doing, what's the word, restarts? Is that the old model? They've had experience in closing and reopening schools, right? So but usually on a much longer timeline. One of the concerns that's been shared is that we're going to attempt to do something in 3 months, A, that we have not had a lot of experience with, and that B, usually schools sometimes take up to a year to do the planning and to do this. The reason we're going to try to do it in 3 months, and it's extremely aggressive, and there are those that have advised it may not be practical or possible. I believe with additional staff that's experienced and committed and aggressive, that we can do it, because to not do it means that we basically have to have all those staff members, parents, and kids do a transition and then reopen the school as a neighborhood school a year later, right? If we're going to reopen it. To me, we need to get this done, get a beds code so that people can go through the transfer process, and we can have families and staff that know what to expect. And I happen to think we can do it. I know there are a lot of people who disagree with me, but I do think we can do it.
Mr. Powell, I see you grabbing the mic there.
Yeah, if we're finally past the original, the questions that Mary asked, my question is, when do we, the board, get to register our input as to what a new school will look like? We do have a framework for considering new schools, and it's our school's choice program. We've talked about replicating what works, right? We have models that work. We have citywide draw schools that, if replicated, wouldn't have to bus kids across town. If replicated, we would be able to draw from existing knowledge and talent. We could be doing a 13 chromosome split here. We could be cloning the school, and 50% of the teachers could come from an existing school with a specialized model. There are so many ways that we could streamline this, if we were smart about it, and if we use frameworks that already exist. Your predecessor, Barbara, was not interested in new schools. The biggest rationale was that, there was too much changing anyway. A concept that I think we all agree with. But here the state is forcing change, so we're not going to hide behind that curtain anymore, right? we have a chance to make a change. The changes that this board and boards like us have been pushing for and had no success or traction in the past. So when do we get to have our say?
Mr. President, one suggestion just from a technical
And then Mary,
from a technical standpoint, I think the technical next step is to determine what we're going to do between now and the 21st of December in terms of making a decision as to which of these options we're going to elect. I think that's task one. Now, it seems there's a lot of consensus in the room, but that's not the same as a formal decision.
before we address that issue, Mr. Hallmark?
Yeah, I just had a question around that very thing. Just a minute ago, you said I wouldn't be in favor of a partner who came in and like plopped down their pre-plan without talking to the community. I had a question for you as you're researching partners or chiefs, I guess, is the chief of the partnership with the third option, closure and reopen. What is the difference between having a receiver come in, I guess you don't have control over that person, as opposed to a partner who you pick, what's the control thing there? That's the first part. And the second is the cost difference between a receiver and a partner.
So a receiver, my understanding and check me, and tell me if I'm wrong, the receiver would report to the Commissioner of Education. The partner would report to the Superintendent of Schools. So the partner really would be somebody that's consistent with what we're already doing. And I think when you see path forward, you're going to see that expanding seats in replicating schools, replicating schools that have shown successful practice in Rochester, seeking to identify and potentially close schools sooner that may need to be restarted, all might be strategies that get recommended. So my thinking is that knowing that we've got new federal regulations coming in, knowing that we want to be in a position that even though we never want this to happen again, we want to make sure that we have better and skilled capacity to do this. So you can already see that we don't have sort of, an exact, like do this week 1, do this week 2, do this week 3, because we're learning as we go along. Whereas when we moved, when we talked to New York City, and we did talk to some folks in other states as well, because they've done this so many times, they have an entire department that does these things with protocols and knows what they're doing. My biggest fear, and again, I'm going to be honest about this, is that, Carl, am I correct that when we apply for a BEDS code, that we don't get a do-over?
There's no do-over.
Which means I have
If
to
we
get,
fail, the
I
commissioner will act
feel
unilaterally.
very responsible for this district in terms of making sure that whatever I submit is going to be acceptable, because I'm told we don't get a do-over.
So what does that mean exactly? That there's not a do-over?
If the commissioner rejected our plan, we would not have the option to submit another plan. The commissioner would just simply appoint someone and go on from there.
Okay.
But again, as I indicated on last meeting, this isn't going to happen in a vacuum. At least 5 people in this room know the commissioner, and it would be negligence on our part if we didn't have a conversation with her. So I don't anticipate that's going to happen, because if we're doing our job, we're going to be talking to her just like we would talk to the people in the community. So I don't know that anybody can answer the question, because I don't want to skip over Commissioner Powell's question, because this is a good one. I mean, hypothetically speaking, just throwing an idea out there. For years, we were talking about a pipeline to soda, a soda tube. To what extent does that get in the conversation? And there are lots of other examples of schools out there that people have been talking about. I don't know that we can answer her question today, but just as I said, we should be soliciting the opinions of people in the community. Most certainly, we should be soliciting, if we're going to talk to people in New York, which is a good thing, because they got experience, we should also be soliciting the opinions of members of the Board of Education. I don't think that can or should happen tonight, but we'll figure out a way to make sure that conversations take place with important stakeholders like the community, like the board, and folks in New York City. Commissioner Powell, you want to say?
Well, I just would follow what you said by saying, we can't make a decision tonight, but I would really like reassurances that existing policies, since path forward hasn't been revealed to us, recommendations on how to do things differently have not been discussed amongst us what's on the books right now in terms of policy, embedded in school and in our schools of choice policy, at least hint at the importance of replicating successful schools over chosen schools. So I would like reassurances that existing board policy will be honored at least in spirit, if not in real practical terms.
Commissioner Adams?
I think that this conversation is minimizing the indigenous strengths that we have in this district. And I think that Superintendent Dean Williams, that's something that you brought to us, is your interest in history of tapping, the strength of educators and holding that up. And I feel like this conversation, whether we're talking about, it seems like an almost dismissal of the receivership option in favor of the developing a defense code. Both conversations, clearly the receivership, when it's on its face, does that. It dismisses indigenous assets. But I think that the way that this conversation is going toward the new Vets Code development, the conversation is making me feel like we're doing the same, because we're talking about partnership organizations, outside organizations, when we haven't talked to the school community. But I'm done. I won't harp on that
So
anymore.
I'm just going to say,
No,
this,
I have a whole line of thought
partnership
here.
organization. What we wanted, frankly, if you were to say to me, what do you want to do? I want to do it ourselves, so that we can do the process that we've identified. But what we're trying to do is, I think, carefully go through all the issues and options for you as a board, so that we can see where people are. I'm going to tell you that as we do this work, and I can hear it here tonight, there is a tension between feeder neighborhood zones, community schools, and citywide maintenance. And that has been consistent in the entire path forward process, where you see very strong views for very valid reasons on both sides. And so somewhere in this conversation is the multiple pathways. But I'm going to agree that what we did was look very carefully at what that school is currently doing. Because I don't want to ignore the fact that we made a mighty effort in terms of supporting the work that was already there. Pointed out in writing all of the new curriculum, the staff turnover. Beth was very vocal in her support of the principal of the school, to the commissioner and the state ed department. You've seen all of the written things that we promoted. So just so that you know that in my analysis with this team, it's trying to figure out what can we honor as important and value. We got their school plans, we know their partnerships, we know what they want to do, what they believe in, the restorative work. There's too much good foundation there. Quite frankly, one of our conversations was, how much do we need to change? Because people said to us, don't attempt to make minor changes and submit back for a Vets Code again, because there will be a recognition that you've repackaged the same school. Well, to the extent that some of it needs to be not repackaged, but sort of reorganized in the way that we think about it, I don't want to dismiss what's already there. And it's, quite frankly, a tension. This is a real tension for us, because if I didn't feel so strongly that what has been put in place in the last 2 years in that school had the potential to work, I don't think we would be so cautious about what we're trying to do. Right?
So I wasn't.
Go ahead.
So thank you for bringing it in, because I do think that you make a point that when we have conversations, that when we get into a conversation, we're talking about like a concept, and sometimes it doesn't convey the support and commitment for the work that's already been done, because frankly, they just need more time.
So I appreciate that, and I agree. I would say, though, that in terms of whether it's a neighborhood-focused school, in general, as we said before, somewhat of a biased dismissal in this conversation and presentation. That's just the way I feel. And I should share my own personal bias, and what people who I've had conversations with over this past month will share that my bias has been toward actually the open and the closure and reopen process, and keeping things internally. So So that is where my bias is, and yet I find myself seeing this presentation and feeling like we're too quickly and in a biased way dismissing the receivership possibility. And for example, there's a long list of cons under the independent receiver listing, and it also assumes that there can be no kind of agreement with the commissioner about constraints and expectations. The same kind of conversation and negotiation that you're having to go through regarding getting a new beds code certainly could be part of a conversation with an independent receiver. There's also, under the cons, it lists constricted seat availability within the district, then it lists decrease of district-wide seat capacity. I think those are the same items. I think it's just redundant. And then it talks about reduced access to site-based programming. Well, independent receivers could actually have more access to site-based programming. There's all kinds of things on this con list that I feel are kind of padding it. Whereas on the closure and reopen course, the only thing that's listed is an increased financial obligation as a con. And certainly an increased financial obligation is a major con for the receivership, criteria as well. But we didn't list anything about uncertainties in terms of risk, which you were just speaking to. There's no do-overs. That to me should be a serious con with the closed and reopen criteria. We also, and I'll close here, but just responding to the idea that we would have more staff, more partnership organizations. We already have more chiefs than we've ever had. And I realize that's, there's trade-offs and that's accounted for by some other shifts. We have more chiefs than we've ever had. We have a receivership chief. That should be the purview of that position, as well as many staff in central office, in innovation, and other related departments that deal with receivership and related bureaucracies. So I hear you and I respect the request for additional resources, but I find that an advantage with the close and reopen should be that it's relatively cost efficient. And it does not sound like that would be the case the way things are being described at this point. And again, supporting Willa's point, our existing policy point, and then just one last reminder that our most successful schools have come from Indigenous development. If you talk about School 15, the children's school, if you talk about School Without Walls, SODA, if you talk about all of our successful schools, they came from within and with supportive administrative environments. So, in the end, I'm not arguing for a receiver by any means. I'm like the last person to argue for that, but I feel that we really need to open this discussion in a more, a much more comprehensive way.
Commissioner Powell, Commissioner Powell's not waiting for me. Commissioner Powell.
There's so much of what you said that I absolutely agree with, and I noted some of those things myself, and I want to be happy to talk to you offline about them rather than tie up other people's time. But we look at page 2, the appointment of an independent receiver from our own list is already off the table. That clock ran out yesterday.
No, we had an extension.
I think the reason we got the extension is because some folks said, we're not going that way, okay? Come on, let's be real. And the commission, for us to say, we've got 20 days to tell the commissioner, you pick one for us. Who in this room wants to just turn that over to the commissioner, New York State Commissioner of Education? No concept whatsoever what she would do with that. There's nobody in this room that would say yes to that. So I think we're, I'm going to use some strong language, and I apologize, but it's the only way I can phrase it. I think we're picking a fight that we don't have to back here. And I also want to underscore some other points you made, that tension between citywide draw versus neighborhood and community schools. If this district had moved over the last 20 years towards replicating our most popular schools, which are citywide draw schools, if we had been moving in that direction all of this time that the school choice program had been in existence, that tension wouldn't exist because every zone would have those resources. We wouldn't be talking about families moving from Charlotte down to school number 1 at Cobb's Hill, that conversation simply wouldn't be happening. And we've done nothing to close the school, the zone boundaries. You look at this map, and it showed me this scatter diagram that shows that families literally are coming from every single aspect of the city. School 41 is a citywide draw school, but we won't call it that. And a close and reopen is a perfect opportunity to get that in realignment, because not only should the teachers be reapplying for their seats, but the students as well. And if they live in a different zone, they should be invited to accept a seat in the school closest to themselves, or at least within their own zone. And that would have to be negotiated with the families on a one-on-one basis, with the needs of that family squarely in the bullseye, the scope.
Commissioner Hallmark?
Yeah, you didn't answer my question, and you know about the financial difference. Well, I didn't ask it specifically about financial differences between the independent receiver and the close and reopen. What I noticed on this list was opportunity for possible SIG continuation. Is that really a possibility, or like if you close it, that's gone? I mean, talk about that.
So those are some of the things we asked New York. They did get their SIG, I believe. We want to advocate for the community schools money as well to see where that would travel with. I do want to just say that prior to this evening, my gathering and talking to people has been around gathering information for an informed decision for you to make about those 3 options. And one of the reasons why we put December 21st as a possible option for it to be decided then is that we could have more time to have engagement. Because even though that timeline it's strictly a draft, we just wanted to see what might it look like till from September backwards. And that's the reason why we did that. And it is a short time period to March 1st, which brought us to the February board meeting. So it goes from December essentially to the February board meeting to make sure engagement occurs, that we come to the board, answer your questions, so on and so forth. So that's just to give you some context about what the past several weeks have been, but also moving forward to get to March 1st.
We haven't heard from Commissioner Cruz, and I wanted to invite Commissioner-elect Natalie Shepherd if she wanted to make a comment or two. You did? Barbara, did you want to add something? She was good.
Yeah, thank you. I just, and I thank you for the opportunity just to share a couple of more items, because in looking at all of the issues and the options, so perhaps the word chief is not the right word, I don't know what to call it, but one of the models that is currently used in another district is to take a principal from a high-performing school, and we all know that there are advantages and disadvantages when you start pulling principals out of schools, right? So we've heard about it before, and we have several chief openings currently that we're looking to fill, and we have unfilled positions. So we're very sensitive about the fact that we have substitutes in positions, and you know, we're trying to grow pipelines, right? But one of the things that frankly was recommended that we look at was taking a high-performing school in the district, taking the principal, having the principal serve as a lead principal or executive coach principal, having them stay low touch on their current school 1 day a week, moving a highly qualified assistant principal up for 2 years. That gives that person training in the model so that they can then go to another school, and gives the new principal of the school, whether it's the current principal in the school or a new individual, either way gives them 2 years. So the example would be if you were going to replicate expeditionary learning, if you were going to replicate certainly that model, that you need to make sure that you have enough principals and teachers in the school that are familiar with the grade level expeditionary learning curriculum that could assist in the day-to-day implementation. Because it is a new school, you want to make sure that it's staffed and successful, very similar to what you did with the ECPO. You want to make sure that you provide the amount of support and the amount of staff. And so really that's, to us, as we look now at the other schools in the district, not only for this school, but in terms of for other schools in the future, where do we have that capacity and which curriculums do we have that might be appropriate? So the idea came up, I had not thought of that. That was a group met with me over the weekend and said, you know, you've got IB programs in middle schools and high schools. Why don't you consider that now? I'm not saying how I feel about that. Frankly, I don't know that much about the IB curriculum at the elementary level, but that's just an example where IB, expeditionary learning, and I'm sure that's probably more of an expert in elementary curriculum than I am, but I'm sure that there's other curriculums that could be adopted. So as far as cost, you're looking at the cost of the teachers, the teaching team, the 20 days of the summer training and curriculum instruction, making sure that they have community schools, an extended school year, an extended school day, and also the kind of, quite frankly, support and coaching that you would expect for the first 2 years so that we can make sure that they're successful. And it would be at a level of intensity that would exceed what a receivership chief that's working with 8 other schools can do. I just think that that's what we're trying to do, is find the most cost-effective way to do it, but also do it very seriously because it has to be successful.
So I don't think we have to formally take the vote, but I think we do have to have a conversation that's clear, that gives the administration some direction. So if we look at the PowerPoint presentation, there was closure was an option. So let's just limit our conversation to a yes or a no. I kind of like closure, I don't like closure, because we got to give the administration some
I have another
direction.
question before you get
Yes,
to that.
yes, ma'am.
So what will happen, are we still going to use the building? Or we will?
It depends on what happens. Like, for example, let me just, to respond to your question, if we decide to close the building, get rid of the beds code, what would happen is, and we weren't repurposing it for another school, and the city would take it back. The city would take it back. But technically, the first choice that we have to make, it doesn't have to be in this order, is to close what is now known as 41.
Okay, so then the next question is, if we were to move all of those students from 41, have we did an assessment of where there may be space available? I know that there had been some discussion about doing an analysis of that. So have we did the analysis that we know whether we are space shortage or space abundant?
I think Carl answered that in his presentation.
Okay, I think I missed that.
Go ahead.
If we are going to look at keeping the student body together, we do not have the capacity to put that student body in a building as a whole. We would have the capacity if we were to disperse those students across the city. Yes, we can absorb those.
How about the special, the autism strand? There's 7 of them. We wouldn't be able to keep them together, would we?
No.
So that's a big, an important population. There's 7 strands with autism. We would not be able to keep them together. That's
So
just-
what would happen?
It would just be speculative on my part.
Okay.
But they would just have to be probably
Divided up into
classified.
the
I
various-
don't know how their IEPs would each
Okay.
individually have to be adjusted. There would have to be hearings concerning all of that, great input from parents, and some decisions in terms of placement.
If possible, I'd like to have Commissioner Powell, you're going to address something with respect to closure.
If you recall the first meeting we had on this, I missed it out of a worksheet that outlined seats available with current FTEs. What she did not do is bring in data that from facilities that shows where empty classrooms existed elsewhere, where teachers at 41 could occupy and expand the capacity in those buildings. So, but we do have data from last month. We just have to, pull out the folder that we were given last month.
In my attempt to sort of characterize that description is, and I've spoken to this at length, and of course I've listened to Carl's presentation, that scenario is extremely difficult to close the school and to disperse those students, particularly if you have in mind the best educational setting for those 7 strands. It would be very difficult. So, but that's my characterization of it. But I would like us to begin to make a decision so that we could give our staff some guidance. And normally I wouldn't be doing this, but the time frame is very tight. None of us created this time frame. But so it compels us to make a decision, at least with respect to giving our staff some direction about where they want to go. Does this deal with closure, or you want to?
A clarification
Okay.
on the autistic class. So on this page 5, where it talks about general education and students with disabilities seats, I understand that there's 7 classes worth of students, 54 students, that we don't have capacity in one building to move 54 students. I get that. My question is, when we say we can't do this without dispersing, would that mean, could we move like the first grade of 6 into one school as a whole and keep those students together, or the second grade of 6 as a whole in another school, or we don't even have that capacity?
So I will tell you why you wouldn't want to do that. So one of the things with developing strands for high-intensity needs students, whether they're students with autism or students with multiple disabilities, is the relative amount of specialization that you want to provide in terms of related services, occupational physical therapy services, speech therapy or whatever we're going to have, music therapy. It's really important that there's consistency for students with autism, that they get to know the staff. And so what you do with the high intensity programs is try to create those strands, and that's something actually we'll get forward. Our students with disabilities move at a rate and degree that exceeds that of their non-disabled peers, and from an equity standpoint, that's something we're trying to address. So it would be our goal. It would be our goal. The students with disabilities move at a rate and degree that exceeds that of their non-disabled peers.
Move at a rate,
Meaning that you might go to 2 grade levels, and then you'll go to 2 grade levels over here, 2 grade levels over there, whereas a student in general education might get a K-6 or K-8 opportunity. So one of our proposals is to build back the continuum of service in each of our schools and in each of our zones to reduce the likelihood that students and their families are disrupted, right? So one of the advantages of having a strand, and it's not to say you couldn't do it, but it wouldn't be in the best interest of the students. So it would be our goal to have them stay as a group or move as a group.
All grades.
So all of the autism stream in particular.
Mr. Adams,
No,
what's-
it's more than covered.
So again, I want to stay focused on questions that relate to closure. Any other questions or comments about closure? No? All right, so again, we don't need to take a formal vote, but I'll start off by saying I would not, under the circumstances described, support closure as not. Anybody else want to articulate what their opinion is? Not give me no sermons. Just tell me what your opinion is on closure.
My opinion on closure is it should not be on the table. It's a building that is an asset that we should not give in.
Mr. Hallmark,
I agree. No closure.
Mr. Cruz,
No closure.
Vice President.
I'm not sure.
So I think the staff has some sense as to where the board is guiding you in terms of closure. That is not an option for us, all right? So the next one would be independent receiver where we pursue our own. Now, let me just tell you, I had mentioned to you all that I had had some conversations with an experienced person who knows our district really well. I can just tell you this, that person is not on the commissioner's list as of moments ago. So to tell you that we can discuss the pursuit of an independent receiver, we can't. We can't talk about whether it would be beneficial, whether it would be costly, because we just, as Carl said, we don't know what the details are. I did have a very thorough conversation. This person said they were going to submit something. She's not on the list. If she's not on the list, that tells me, we could have another, how many days until the 26th to present this person, but, and I feel very comfortable about this person, because we don't know this person yet. And because of one of you guys called me and said, hey, man, who is this person? Why can't I have a name? It's just like anybody else applying for a job. At this particular juncture, they wanted to submit, see what would happen, and I just don't feel comfortable identifying the person. But you obviously can't make a decision on somebody you don't know. So pursuing an independent receiver, it's just not an option because we can't talk about it. Does anybody disagree with that? And there might be some, yes.
The only thing I would say is that it would be useful to have any information related to that just for comparison purposes.
It's either
In terms of, so just, I'm not in support of it, but the research that would have been done, just like the reason why talking to the school community adds brains to the conversation and information that you might not otherwise tap or that you might have to go out and find later on, it would be a useful source of information if there were a proposal that were able to be seen blended or sections of it were able to be seen blinded.
It would be extremely helpful, and as Dr. Lee will tell you, I spoke to this person well over a month ago. It just has not materialized yet, so there's really nothing that I can advance to you all in terms of what it might mean in terms of comparisons to what we might have. It just, yes.
Well, and the other point about that is that anybody that we might choose has to be approved by the commissioner, and she may not approve it, right?
Well, I think this was the brilliance of what this person was trying to do. We were trying to get on the commissioner's list, have the commissioner take a look-see first. And so if the commissioner said yes, then of course we could, if you all wanted to, we could recommend this particular person. She is not on the list just yet.
Right, so if nobody exists on those lists.
Right, that's right.
It's an imaginary option.
Well,
It's
that's-
sort of like saying you can go, you have admission to this college, but we're not giving you financial aid, right? It's like, it's not a real option.
That's part two, or choice number three. There is no one, Dr. Lee just checked, there is no one on the list as independent receivers from the commissioner, because as you all know, if this hasn't been described to you, the commissioner maintains her own list of independent receivers from which boards of education can select a receiver. You all should know, as of 3 minutes ago, there's nobody on the list for Rochester. I was a bit surprised to learn that there's a list for Rochester, there's receivers for Rochester, receivers for New York City, or there should be receivers for Rochester. There are receivers for New York City on the list, but there's none for Rochester. So in terms of that choice, we don't have anything to choose from. There's, yes, Commissioner Adams.
Commissioner Hallmark asked a couple times about cost comparison between the two options. Do we have, have you entertained that? Do you have a sense? I think that it would be much less expensive if we went with the more, what I'm calling indigenous route of, and using resources that we have existing for receivership implementation. But what I'm hearing you talk about sounds expensive.
So I think we can get a right? Because we can get a cost, as an example of a cost of a partner that's worked with other schools. We have that actually. I'm going to assume that because they also serve as the receiver, the partner we talked to is also on the receiver list.
For New York City?
Well, for you, everywhere in the state, there is on the state's receiver list. They didn't necessarily say they did not here, but we wanted to get a sense. So we do get those costs.
Let me
We
just
can make a manager.
let me just interrupt this conversation. I want to stay focused here. We've decided that closure is not an option for the board. The next option that we have to talk about to stay focused is, are we interested in, given the circumstances, identifying our own independent receiver and referring that person to the commissioner? We have, how many days left, Carl? What's today? Today is the 5th. So we have 21 days left to do that. Are we interested in delaying a decision to identify our own independent receiver? I'll kick off the conversation by saying, I'd love to have more time, but we don't, and I do not support delaying our decision today to find an independent receiver. Commissioner Powell?
I don't support independent receivers as a concept, so I wouldn't put it off.
I concur.
Commissioner Cruz? Commissioner Adams?
Agreed.
All right, so I'd say the same thing about the independent receivers on her list. That is Commissioner Elias. There is none for Rochester. I would not support waiting and calling her up and saying, hey, can you get us an independent receiver? How about you, Commissioner Powell?
They think it's a game, they think it's a joke.
I think that is a no, you don't want to wait.
I mean, what am I saying?
You're saying you don't want to,
Right. So, do I agree with that or no?
you would agree that you don't want to wait.
Just tell us what you want.
You don't want to identify an independent receiver from the commission. All right.
That's right.
All right, so that leaves us, unless my mathematics is wrong, that leaves us one source of direction for the administration, and that would be to close and reopen. We're not talking about exactly who would be reopening or how that would go. There's got to be more conversations, but it won't be tonight. And there will be conversations. I think the administration is sure there will be conversations with the community. There will be conversations with the Board of Education, because we're going to have to approve this. They can't just say, okay, we're going to do X, Y, and Z. So they would be wise, like they would be wise to talk to Commissioner Ely. They would be wise, Commissioner Powell, to talk to us, right? So just on this last option, I'll start it off. I believe that we should pursue closing and reopening. I'll just go down the line, Commissioner Powell.
We actually have to verbalize that.
Well, I'm just trying to make sure. Well, yeah, it's the only option left. You're right.
Exactly.
Just so that it's clear, does that make sense to you?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, but with serious exploration of a different approach.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I'm serious about that. I know you are too. Vice President.
Yeah, I
Elliott?
guess I was not clear about the first option of closing, and that's why I said I wasn't sure. And so I'm actually still not sure at this point, but I'll go. I think I want to hear more from the school community, yeah, so I think I have to be in that position once I student.
The first one was closing and dispersing. This one is closing and reopening, with the understanding that some of these students would probably, and staff, might come back to the building. But Carl and Barbara are very clear about this, and everybody out there should hear this. This is not going to be a shell game. The commissioner is not going to see anything but a new, configured, different school there. And we don't have any choice about that. Because if we try to play a shell game, she'll shoot us down. All right? So the administration, yes, sir. Yes.
Number one, I think hopefully we learn something from this process. Something you said a few minutes ago, Superintendent, and sort of we glossed over it, and that is that be ready for when this happens again. As opposed to how we normally do things when we try to pull the trigger with 60 or 90 days or 120 days to do things. And I think, if we don't learn a lesson here with respect to potentially our other schools that might be going down the same track, then I think we have lost a lot of time and energy. So we should be able to figure out what those schools potentially could be, number one. Number two, there's nothing wrong with reacting quickly because it forces you to make decisions around quickly. Yes, we have to be open with everybody. But I think it really forces you to give it a sense of urgency to get it done as opposed to putting things off. And the last thing I wanted to say was, I think you have a lot of partners within the building in terms of, we have an entire parent engagement team that we spend a lot of money on, that we should be able to use those folks and repurpose them, at least for a little while, to get out into the community and talk to folks, and talk to families, and talk to parents about what's going on, and using them as your liaisons. You also have a phenomenal computer, internet site. That we should have a site dedicated to 41 School, up and have that information up and available, in real time, so that if somebody really wants to find out what's going on, they can go on that site and get information about what's the latest to School 41, as opposed to having to come into a meeting. And one of the challenges, as you know, is always trying to organize people around a meeting because folks work, folks have so many other things to do. And that's the most time-consuming part of all of this. So are there ways to sort of get information to people rather quickly?
I would submit to you that we have increased the number of expeditionary learning schools already. first we only had School 58, and now we have School 10 and 58, and I think there's an expeditionary model at School 8, if not the whole school, at least part of the school. Right there is enough to assign one school per zone. I'm not entirely convinced that expeditionary learning has to be the program, that goes there if we're going to replicate success, because it has been replicated. And parenthetically, there's no reason that those schools shouldn't have become zone-wide schools instead of being city-wide schools. But there are other models that we have been in use for the last 30 years or more. And we just finished having a conversation about one of them, that was School 15. And we have made the decision, and we're probably not going to retract on that decision, to move the School 15 program to the far edge of our city, to the very boundary of Brighton. And still it will remain a citywide draw school. I submit to you that if there was one program that was worthy of consideration of replicating, it would be the children's school model and offer it to west sides, the west side of the city, so that we aren't busing kids clear from Charlotte to Cobbsville.
So I would agree, and I would ask that we look at the results of the children's schools, specifically their grade-to-grade curriculum and their results, and see whether or not that would meet criteria.
And to Commissioner Cruz's point, we have in leadership meetings discussed with the administration the critical point of creating a pipeline, understanding what is in the pipeline, the schools that are potentially in the position to go through this next year. I think they identified perhaps 2 schools, and I know based on conversations that we've had that the administration is already looking at the schools, because you're right, this would be a shame if we went through this again next year. It's totally unnecessary. You can begin to plan for these things in advance. So I think we've accomplished what we set out to today. I apologize for the late hour. I regret that the board doesn't have better news to share or more news to share with the folks that turned out tonight. But as you all can tell, this is all part of a state structure and scheme that has us making these decisions. It's not something that the board and certainly the administration would have chosen to do. Barbara has made it very clear to you, if you didn't know it already, she advocated, her and her entire team advocated aggressively for you all to get more time. That just was not going to be, the commissioner was just not going to be convinced to allow her to do that. And so we have these choices. And you, thankfully, participated in a very transparent process where you saw how we got through the decision-making process about what we thought was best for the students. That conversation is not over, and we hope that you all participate in that conversation, because you are in the best position to help us decide what is best for the students that you currently serve, that you're currently serving, and you're doing it quite successfully. So we hope you don't disengage from this conversation. You're absolutely necessary. We know it is about the kids, not about your jobs. And so we know, and we hope, and we pray that you will be there as part of the conversation about what would happen next. If you don't get that call, if you don't see that email, let us know. But I anticipate you will. Please be a part of that ongoing conversation. I need a motion to...
No. I need another question.
Go ahead.
So, Carl, what is the next step?
Okay.
The literal next step was suggested on the timeline to make a decision. Convene a formal session and take a vote as to what you want to do. That's the only way the board can act.
So the board needs to make a decision.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Well, but again, people need to understand that there's going to be, the administration understand there are some parameters about the recommendation they're going to bring to us. They got to talk to us, they got to talk to people in the community. Obviously, they're going to continue to talk to other folks. So what I'm saying to you, Commissioner Elliott, is I don't think this is going to be the last meeting in advance of when we're going to be voting on what that school is going to look like.
That's not what my question was.
Okay,
My question was solely the next step. What's the next step? So if that meant another meeting like this, I just need to
There'll be another meeting. There'll be another meeting. That's what
I apologize. I didn't understand.
Yeah.
I thought you were talking about the next legal step in the process.
That too. I appreciate that information, but then what is the next step in this?
Mr. Adams?
But I think, aren't we being asked to vote on this on the 21st?
Vote on
On one of these 3 options, and I thought that the timeline for the close and reopen was
No,
to
if,
give
Carl, you
her
correct me wrong, if we don't give her a decision, recommend somebody, an independent receiver, by the 26th, we lose that option.
Correct.
That doesn't mean we have to tell her we're going to open up a school. By the
15th, I think,
of January, then we have to tell her whether we're going to take somebody off her list.
Well, that's really our final change.
So at
Because
that point,
if we do or we don't, I mean, that's our last shot.
so we have to tell her by that point, we've chosen option to close and reopen. Is that right?
Now, hopefully, I mean, there's nothing that says that we have to use every bit of time, to do that. Right? There's nothing that would preclude the board if it wants to make a decision in advance of that, and maybe give a little more planning time and folks who have it.
And we would be wise to do that again, because we're talking about relationships. So we should be talking to the commissioner about where we're going. I assume Barbara is probably, or somebody, I will talk to her in the next week or two, and just tell her where we're thinking about going with this.
So
That would
when
be
will-
the way to go.
So when will the board need to make the decision of the choice?
Depending on what the choice is, there are two options. If you are going to nominate your own receiver, not on the commissioner's list, we have until the 25th, technically, the 21st practically, because of the holiday. And if we are not going to pursue that option, but we want to nominate a receiver from the commissioner's list, even though there's not one for Rochester, there are folks who presumably, could be qualified by the commissioner who are on the list, there will be two. We would have to do that by the 15th of January.
So, but if we were making the decision to close and reopen the school, when would we have to make that decision?
There is no real deadline. The reason that we put the 15th on the calendar is that by the 15th, we will have exhausted every option but to close the meeting.
Okay.
I realize it's titled sample, but if this is meant to be relevant, I know it says sample, it does say December 21st, preliminary proposal for closing and opening, for approval by the Board of Education and Superintendent. So that is on our sample.
Yeah, that was only intended to indicate the steps, and if the board were to decide prior to the absolute ultimate date, then that would be an ideal date to make the call. But the board doesn't have to, and we're not saying that you must or mustn't. That's a decision for the board. We've now presented what we believe is all the information that the board needs to make a decision. It's now up to the board to decide when it wants to do so.
And if you recall Commissioner Ilia's letter, it said, I'm giving you more time because we appreciate that you probably didn't have the time you had to vet the decision about the independent receiver. And she gave us until 26. That's all that letter said. So if we don't do that, it doesn't mean we lose the option to close and reopen. Those deadlines are for selecting the independent receiver.
I think the other thing too, when we backed into that date, we looked into the board meeting dates. So we just going by the calendar.
Any other questions? Because if not, I need a motion to go into executive session for the purpose of receiving legal advice regarding existing lease or something. Thank you, Commissioner Hallmark. Can I get a second to that?
Second.
Commissioner Adams, all those in favor, say aye. Aye. For any of you who are interested, we're going to reconvene downstairs, second floor, and that's where our meeting will end. We're not going to talk anymore about the